So I view it as the auditee owns, like, it's their system that they own where the data is coming from, and they've configured everything in that system and it's theirs, right? So to me, there's an inherent, I can trust something more inherently from that perspective, right? Whereas if it's coming from a monitoring tool, they really have no ability to control the back end, right? If it's a third party tool, if it's their own, I think that's totally different, right? I think right now, if you want that, how it's being done, you're just paying for brand mostly. But like, I think like, the bigger firms, I don't know if the bigger firms do higher quality audits than, let's say, my firm. If you ask me, I would tell you we do the same quality audit, right? But I also can't charge as much as them because they have a huge brand recognition and there's a persona that comes along with that, right? That you're kind of, right? So I don't really know how to answer the question because I don't think people are actually paying for quality.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GRC Engineer Podcast. The guest I have with me today is an MVP of GRC on LinkedIn. We could call it Meme King. Sock Tool King, I think, is also probably an accurate representation. Of course, you all know who I have with me, Troy Fine. Troy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Am I the first non-engineer on the show?
It's likely, which is good, We like the plurality of opinions.
Yeah, that's good. All right, let's do it.
I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this episode. FedRAMP, Ref 520X, GovRAMP, or CMMC. There's a company on a mission to make them fun, and that company is called Paramify. If you're chasing your first authorization or stuck living in common hell, if you know, you know, Paramify makes it simple with the POA management and automated documentation tool. To get you started, they are offering my listeners a $750 gap assessment. Basically, they will show you where you're at right now and give you a clear roadmap or where you need to go next in one clean dashboard. Go to paramify.com/GRC to get access to their offer. That's paramify.com/GRC. And now, back with the episode. It will be amazing. So, to present Troy, I think everyone knows Troy. So Troy has been I think you've been in the kind of security compliance industry for like a decade and a half, or around that. You've worked at Schneider Downs, right, for I think almost a decade. Then you work on the vendor side, so you're working with Dwada for I think 2.5 years. And Gilles Norton, right? You're working there. And then now you have your own firm, Fine Insurance. I think when you announced it, you had probably every single possible pun that was tried, and even in my brain,
I have a good last name, right, for that stuff. So I don't mind it. Good pun.
But yeah, exciting. It was like February. Around February this year that you started.
I launched it in February. Well, like it launched like privately in February, but like I announced it in April.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been announced. Yeah, about 6 months ago now. So exciting, kind of having your own company as well, and kind of doing things, do where you want as well, which is always exciting when you kind of work for yourself. So, Troy, the first question I like to ask my guests is like kind of their story with GRC, how it came about in your career, and kind of high level background on you as well.
Yeah, how it came about. I don't know if it's a good story. I think it just kind of I fell into it, I would say. When I went to school, I went to college 2005, 2009. I graduated in 2009, which in the US, well, probably globally, was probably the worst time to graduate college.
Yes.
The financial crisis. Maybe you were around the same time. I don't know how old you are, but anybody around that time would have been experiencing it, right? If they were in school. So it wasn't easy to get a job. People weren't hiring, right? So, I did IT and accounting in college, right? Which was kind of weird. Like, people were always like, why are you doing both at that time, right? Because it's like, this was a time when cybersecurity wasn't even a word yet. GRC, I never heard of it. I never heard of any either one of these terms. Like, I don't even remember people. The biggest thing about cybersecurity started was, I think that was the Target hack, maybe around that time. That's really when people started like notice it with the credit cards. And the funny thing is, it was a HVAC vendor that, if you recall,
Yes, it was a supplier, HVAC supplier.
The funny part is that vendor was actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. which isn't actually too far from where I live, actually in Pittsburgh, which was kind of interesting. But
You
uh,
were indirectly involved.
in Pittsburgh has like kind of like a good cyber culture here for initially because of the universities. So Carnegie Mellon,
Yes, they
a
have this
lot.
amazing CISO
Pittsburgh with
program, right? It's
cyber and the
based there.
government, and so like cybersecurity in Pittsburgh is kind of almost like a mini hub for cybersecurity. It started, back in they were very involved with cyber, so I think it was a culture in Pittsburgh, and the companies here, even the CPA firm, started to like want to help people get in cyber risk and manage their cyber risk and do assessments. And so when I worked at Schneider Downs, we started doing SOC 2 audits, right? Um, I had never done anything in cybersecurity or IT, but I started to kind of take a liking to that work. And this was right when it came out. SOC 2 kind of started in 2010, 2011, and I started working at Schneider Downs in 2010. So it was
Wow.
just kind of like opportunistic, right? Like I didn't plan on it. It just happened. I saw an opportunity. I had the CPA background, so I understood like the auditing concepts. I had an IT background, so I had general knowledge of like basic IT. Think about it, a regional CPA firm. How many people like know IT at a regional CPA?
Yeah.
Probably not many, right? So it was just like an opportunistic thing that I grabbed hold of and went with it. And I started doing SOC 2. First client we did was using AWS. Never heard of AWS at the
That
time.
was early. That was
It's
early. Wow.
2010, 2011.
Yep.
Not everybody in the world was using it, but some people started doing it. So that was a good opportunity to start learning what is AWS, like what is happening here, like how did you go from what's the cloud, and that's really what started it. And then I just went with it. Started trying to learn more. We started building our SOC 2 practice, starting auditing more tech startups, more SaaS companies, and I just started learning cloud, right, and security and cyber. And that's what launched it. And then I just started learning about SOC 2. There weren't many people that really understood SOC 2 and the technology they were auditing, I would say, as an auditor. So I said, I'm just going to start posting stuff and trying to educate the market. Um, and that's what I started doing, started educating the market. People started liking my stuff. Built a brand on LinkedIn, started posting memes in GRC without even knowing it, right? So, I mean, like, that's really the story, but I guess the moral of that story is like whether it's GRC or anything, it could be AI now, right? I mean, there's always something new on the horizon in cyber, GRC, or any field, and if you just see an opportunity, go for it, right? And that's all I really did. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was doing. I just said, whatever, let's go for it and see what happens, right? So here I am.
I love it. I love it. I think there's really always this thing like where it's like a combination of several factors, unrelated, and then you end up somewhere, and then take a liking to it, and you also came in, you know, at the beginning, so you were able to also build an expertise before like kind of it became ubiquitous and everyone was only speaking about SOC 2 or cloud, because everyone's speaking about SOC 2 right now, even more in recent years. And same for like, when you say AI, it's the same, right? Like someone that kind of focuses on AI security controls and stuff, like it's so early, even if people think it's already everywhere, it's not. So like if you focus on that now, in a couple of years, you probably build a career for yourself that might ensure that you have some yes, some insurance for your career, let's say, because you're
Yeah.
focusing on more cutting edge skills.
And I think if you can develop expertise early before everyone kind of has a general knowledge of, AI is a good example, right? It's like AI security and like what is good AI security and like what controls should you be doing? Like it's all just like we're all just trying to figure it out right now, right? But if you really get into the weeds and start doing this and learning it, in a couple of years you become that expert and then you can filter out the noise, right? Like so I think that's like an important skill to know like what not to pay attention to in this, especially
Yeah.
nowadays. Like there's so much noise, so much stuff out there. It's just like, no, that's wrong. And like, not just with SOC 2, but with everything. Right. So, becoming that trusted expert and knowing what to ignore and knowing how to explain something and focus on what actually matters. Uh, you need to be in the weeds and you need to do that early. You need to know how things work. You need to do that early. Otherwise you just like listen to whatever. And it's hard to judge, like, does this actually matter or does it not matter? Like, this person said on LinkedIn this, right? So maybe that matters. I get a lot of reactions, right? So I think the people who really understand it were the ones that were in the weeds early on and filtered
I
that.
agree. I agree because then when you build like when everything gets more complex and there's like sub ramifications, if you understand the fundamentals early, then anything that stems from it, you know what you know and you know what you don't know because you have that baseline. So what you said about noise is 100% accurate, right? Because if you know the fundamentals and where everything stems from, you know exactly what's BS, what is relevant, what is actually interesting. So it makes you good at curation as well.
Yeah,
Um,
that's exactly. I think that'll probably become a very important skill as we continue on in this
I
world.
agree. With all the AI stuff. Yeah, I
Exactly.
agree
Like,
with
I
that.
mean, like, I do think about that a lot. Like, what are my kids how are they gonna be able to develop that skill if they're growing up in this world and don't know what it's like without it, right?
Yeah,
That'll be interesting.
yeah. Even us without it right now, sometimes we feel lost. I'm thinking for
Yeah.
our children is going to be wow, completely different planet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, it's like we're probably initially skeptical of everything because of our origin stories and how we grew up and what technology we had, but, like, yeah, like, my kids are not might not develop that skill or need to really learn how to develop that skill because it won't come natural potentially.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. We'll have a LLM enabled kids.
Yeah,
That's what
exactly.
it's going to look like. Super nice. So thanks for kind of that origin stories. You spoke about kind of how it started with SOC 2 and it was like, perfect timing. The skill set you had was also perfect to kind of get excited on that field. And then after that, you worked for a vendor on the GRC automation space. And I want to talk a little bit more about kind of that space as a whole. If you look down on like your history and like over a decade of experience you have, how do you see the role of like auditors on the kind of SOC 2 slash ISO side? So like on the kind of security compliance side, the role evolving as technology available to practitioners changed. How do you see like the change that happened for you as an auditor as there's new generations of tools that came about?
How do I see my role as an auditor changing? That's a good question. I I guess I'll answer from the lens of like continuous control monitoring perspective. So I think a big, let's pretend AI doesn't exist yet. Okay. Let's not worry about AI right now, but like, you have GRC automation tools that are continuously monitoring. You have GRC engineering concepts that are coming into play, which kind of fit into this continuous control monitoring. And some bigger companies are either leveraging technology or building their own proprietary software to do it. And the question becomes, as an auditor, if I'm doing a audit of any sort, not just SOC 2, could be anything that deals with security controls. How are we going to evolve to leverage potentially that continuous control monitoring as evidence, right? Traditionally you get a screenshot, hey, we're good, right? But actually it is much better to leverage continuous control monitoring to say like, hey, throughout the last 6 months, these databases were encrypted. Or, hey, this new database spun up for a couple of days. It wasn't encrypted. Hey, they recognized it very quickly. They fixed it. And now it is encrypted, right? Because perfection is impossible, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of evolving from that perspective, right? Like we want to leverage the continuous control monitoring. At least I do. If I can trust the continuous control monitoring, the data I'm seeing, and then it becomes how do you report on that, right? So like if a company wants to um, hold themselves more accountable, right? And say like, hey, you can leverage our continuous control monitoring evidence. Uh, of course, there's going to be times where we didn't, where it flagged things, right? So like before I gave you a screenshot, and now you're looking at everything, and now you're going to penalize me because for 1% of the time it wasn't in place, but we fixed it quickly. So it's like, how do I report on that as an auditor? What's the most fair way to do that? What's the most transparent way to do that? Um, and do you even need to report on it if it's below a certain threshold, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's all those questions, and then it becomes, what is the actual control? Is the control that encryption is turned on, or is the control that they have a monitoring control in place to monitor that encryption is turned on for all the databases, right? So what is the control that we're auditing now, right? Is it their continuous control monitoring and saying, hey, they're monitoring it, they fix it within an SLA, or is it just that encryption's turned on and the evidence we're going to leverage is the continuous control monitoring? You kind of see what I'm getting at. So the role of the auditor will definitely change in that way. I guess the issues I'm seeing is I haven't seen a really good system, continuous control monitoring system to rely on, right? Um, and that creates some friction sometimes, I guess, right? Because the GRC automation tools want you to rely on their evidence.
Yeah.
Hard to be comfortable with it sometimes as an auditor, because you don't know where it's coming from, how the data got there, um, all that jazz. So
Okay. So in a sense, like you're open to using like kind of the results from the CCM process, but it's like, can you trust them? And like something I'm thinking about is like the way you. So of course, trusting is related to completeness and accuracy, right? Like what
yeah.
checks do you perform to ensure that data coming out of the system is trustworthy and is actually telling the truth? Pre-automation, GRC automation platform days, if you leverage screenshots, like what are the CNA checks that you would do that you couldn't do in the context of that platform?
Well, you just kind of trust AWS, right? So like if someone's giving you screenshots from the production AWS account and showing you their databases are encrypted, right? RDS encrypted. Do I have to perform completeness and accuracy over AWS, or do I just trust the data from AWS inherently because it's AWS?
Yeah,
Also, the other piece of that is the client is giving you that data directly, right? So like if I'm auditing you and you're giving me the evidence, it came from you, the client I'm auditing, right? So you are supposed to be giving me the correct, complete and accurate data inherently, and your company signs off on that at the end of the audit saying, we gave you complete and accurate data. This was accurate. We didn't falsify information. We didn't make up stuff, right? So there's like that direct, it's coming from you, right?
yeah,
When the GRC automation comes in, they're a middle tool, right? They're a middle person. So now it's like, where did the data come from? It didn't come from my client I'm auditing that said they were giving me accurate, complete data. It came from their monitoring system that they own it technically, but they don't configure it. It's somebody else's monitoring data, right? Of their AWS system. So to me, that's one of the biggest differences that people don't realize is like, if I'm an auditor, you're asking me to rely on data that is coming from a third party that I technically don't have any agreements in place with. I don't have any relationship with technically because I'm auditing you, right? So there's this middle layer now where this data is coming from, and how do I know that that's complete and accurate? And to me as an auditor, I have to be more strict with that because it's not coming directly from my client. That's how I view this, right? I mean, if that makes sense.
no, it does, it does, it does. Yeah, because what is fascinating to me is like I understand the middleware stuff, right? Because technically they're running queries against the source systems and they're giving you kind of the outputs from those queries and they apply logic on them and then they say it works, doesn't work. But at the same time, I'm like, that's true. Like you have a relationship with me as the auditee directly versus like with that platform, but you still leverage like middleware. Like you leverage Zoom, you leverage Gmail, you leverage Snagit, you leverage like there's even in the context of that direct relationship, there's still like a middle tool. But I'm like, is it because they're too big? Like completeness and accuracy check on Gmail might be too complex, or is it just like you have this trust by default with certain systems because technically they're just like messaging, just communicating data, or
Well, I think it depends. So I view it as the auditee owns, like, it's their system that they own where the data is coming from, and they've configured everything in that system and it's theirs, right? So to me, there's an inherent, I can trust something more inherently from that perspective, right? Whereas if it's coming from a monitoring tool, they really have no ability to control the back end, right? If it's a third party tool. If it's their own, I think that's totally different, right? Because now it's like their own, and that changes kind of the whole element of the relationship if it's their own proprietary tool. But if they're using a third party tool and they want me to leverage that as evidence that their controls are in place, they've essentially used a third party to test their controls. So whether it's a automation tool or a human, like it could be a human too, right? That they said, hey, we had this person do an audit on us 3 months ago.
yeah, internal audit, yeah.
Well, I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna have the same questions, whether it's a person or a robot or AI doing that testing, if they want me to rely on that testing per se and that evidence. Where I think like if I'm using if I'm using the tool as the middleware, well, now I own the tool as the auditor, so I know what's going on because I've used it, I've configured it, I've done it. Um, if that makes sense. I don't know, as far as like Gmail and Snagit and like Zoom, like, if it's our tools, then we own the results of those tools because it's my tool as an auditor, right? So if I had my own monitoring tool and I was monitoring my client's data and I had my own queries that I wrote and knew that, hey, these are good queries, and I told them to run those queries and they gave me the results, I'd have a lot more. I mean, it's just a different way. I'm just using different methodologies to perform an audit in that case, right? Because I own all that methodology, so to speak, if we want to call
Yeah.
it that.
No, okay. I get what you mean. I get what you mean. So like, so in my sense, to solve it, you just need to know what's going on in the plumbing, right? How does it get to the UI? I'm not sure. So I don't want to say that. I know quite a few GRC automation vendors. I know you can see which queries are run against which entities and stuff. Like, at what point do you think you have enough data to leverage it as is? Do you, like, if for example, I gave you an example, typical, like S3 buckets in AWS, everyone loves that example. So if I can see which query, like the API call, like what's the definition, etc., and then based on whatever, like the response, if you review that, because technically, if they use like out of the box tests, if you audit 50 companies that use the same tool and they all use the same out of the box test, you only care about scope, right? Technically, you care about is the scope matching the production scope that they said and stuff, but the actual test logic should be the same. But it's like how in depth enough you need to go to leverage it versus like wanting to still see the source system.
That's a good question. Like I don't know if anybody knows that answer, right? And that's a very subjective um answer. Like what is enough comfort, right? You talk to 10 different auditors and they might give you 10 different answers, right? So I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. Um, you know, I think one of the ways you can validate data is to like kind of just test a few samples on your own, right? So be like, all right, let's look at this S3 bucket encryption. Like, all right, show me like two S3 buckets in your client in your AWS environment from your actual source system from AWS. Let me just make sure that they're reporting correctly in the GRC automation tool as like the same data, like, hey, boom, here, it says it here in AWS. Here's what it's saying here. Is two enough? I don't know. I'm just like throwing out a number, right? Then we
No,
can,
100%.
how do you know 2 out of 500 is enough, right? Well, it's probably not, but, and then it's like, why don't you just audit the source system then if you're just going to do that, right? So it's like hard to like figure out that answer. Um, I don't really have a good answer. It's I think that's why this is such a big challenge and
Mhm.
why there's a lot of friction, right? And why there are some firms out there that probably do very little validation, right?
Yeah, no, 100%.
And don't do anything, and rely fully on the evidence out of the platforms. And there's some out there that probably rely very little on the platforms. And then there's a lot of us in the middle, probably, right? That are trying to do our best and figure out what is the right balance without really knowing what is, right? So um I I don't have a good answer. But I think people probably just need to I think a lot of people don't understand from an auditor's perspective what challenges they're trying to like go through with this stuff. And I think they just are like, because a lot of times it's I don't know how to say this, right? Like it's the people who are being audited are not auditors, right? So they don't understand that like liability or that risk that an auditor faces by just relying on a green check mark in a tool that says we checked the S3 buckets on this AWS account. It's like, well wait, there's like you went from here to here. Like, how did you get there, right? Like, I mean, like you're telling me just to rely on this evidence, and if something goes wrong And if it comes back to my audit and someone's like, well, wait a second, you just relied on a third-party tool that the client said they were using that was hooked into their AWS environment, and it reported that S3 was encrypted. That's what you relied on. You never actually looked at the source system yourself. Like if something bad were to happen and the court said that, you'd be like, yeah, that probably doesn't sound that good, does it? Does it? You didn't look at the source system as an auditor, right? Like when a lawyer, like if you think about it from that perspective, right? Like, I mean, that's what auditors could potentially face. I'm not saying like that'll ever actually happen, but um, that's where the risk is, in my opinion, right? Is that auditors have to be able to defend their work. Um, and to say you relied on a third party tool with a green check mark and never actually checked the source system probably doesn't sound good if something bad were to happen. I don't know. That's just my
Mm,
opinion.
I understand. I understand that. I understand that. So yeah, because I think sometimes, so let me know if you agree with me. I think sometimes when I see like kind of criticism of like automation platforms, I think some people it comes more from like we need more details to trust them inherently, and then some I feel like they're tainting their criticism with threats that those platforms are making to the auditing industry as a whole. And I also see that often as like a rationale. So for example, like some people tell me like platforms don't do testing, or even me as like someone that might do internal audit for my own company, especially ISO mandates it, a third of the controls for the surveillance audits. Like I can't audit because I'm not an auditor, even though for ISO technically I should have to go through and like test my own controls. And I'm like, I understand that the way it's done, and especially in the kind of SOC 2 lens, is like the one that is valid for the attestation has to be done by the external auditor. Um, but I'm like, if I run a script against the AWS instance, pick something up, maybe take a screenshot like, using maybe a headless browser or something, and then I give that to you, potentially use the middle person to provide that to you, but it's the same result for you because you just see the screenshot, for example. And it's where I'm not like, if you had do you have a wish list for vendors that if they tick those boxes, you think the inherent trust you would have in what they provide would be higher, or do you think it's a little more blurry and more complex to kind of sift through?
I I I don't know. I don't. I I think it's always going to be blurry. And I think the standards will always say it's up to the auditor to use their professional judgment to determine
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
appropriate. Like that's the other challenge with this too, is like people think like we just have like they tell us what to do. It's like, no, they just put the onus on you and you have to figure it out
yeah,
yourself. Um, so I do think I think it will always be fuzzy. I mean, I do think there's a reasonable assurance factor that we also need to consider too, like what's reasonable, right? So I mean, like it's probably not reasonable to look at every single test and validate every single test on every single client that's using a platform and leverage that, right? That's not economically feasible, and it's probably not risk feasible from a risk standpoint. Like it doesn't even make sense, like based from a risk perspective. Like you probably don't need to do that. So the real question I think is what's reasonable, which
yeah,
here's another subjective answer because you have people that are, doing drive-by audits that are just relying on green check marks, are doing zero validation, are not even understanding if the controls are actually reflective of what the client is actually doing. They have no idea. And they're just saying, yep, we're good to go and issuing a report. Like that's probably not reasonable in my opinion, but they might think it's reasonable, right? So like there's that challenge. And then you have others that are just completely saying, I don't want to rely on anything in this. We can't trust any of this. That's not reasonable either, right? So the answer is always somewhere in the middle. And I think what the approach we've taken as auditors, or I've always taken, is like we'll leverage like if it's like policy sign offs, right? Like and that's what's happening in the platform. Like that's a lower risk control anyways. So relying on that data out of the platform, I don't need it. I don't think I need to do any validation, right? Like
yeah,
that is what it is. Let's do that. Security awareness training, background checks, like to me, those are lower risk controls anyways, inherently. So you can kind of rely on that data. But once you start to get into like the infrastructure controls, you kind of have to, or change management controls like GitHub, like, hey, we have all our GitHub data in here and all of our pull requests had, uh, all of our CI/CD checks and all of our security vulnerability testing dependent bot, like it's all in the platform. Don't worry about it. It's all right there. It has green check marks. Like hold on, wait a second. This is how you guys are building your platform, and your whole CI/CD check is in the platform, and all the evidence is there. Like, to me, I have to take a step back and be like, wait, this is kind of one of the main things of our audit. Like, we need to probably do some validation on this data, look at the source system a little bit. We can't just rely on that data. It's too high risk of a control, in my opinion, just to say green check marks are good to go.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of taking that hybrid approach of what are the more higher risk controls in an audit, perform validation on those, and then for lower risk ones, like, yeah, you probably don't need to. That's my reasonable approach to it. But
Yeah, so kind of more of a risk-based approach, right? The more critical controls, you might just dig a bit deeper and like in very few cases just leverage like, kind of those platforms because, you need to do a lot more validation because they're more critical.
yeah, exactly. And I think too, the nature of the organization you're auditing also plays a role in it, right? Obviously, like the complexity of a bigger company would require more validation and more assurance. It's
Yeah.
just bigger scope, more complexity involved, different configuration, maybe multi-cloud, like all that stuff kind of plays a role in it. Whereas like a small 10-person startup company probably has, typically the tech stack is not as complex yet, right? So
It's always the same as well.
it's lower. Yeah, it's just lower inherent risk, right? So
Yeah.
you could probably perform less validation there. But you know, it takes a good auditor, in my opinion, to kind of understand all these nuances and treat different auditees differently. Because if you're treating everybody the same and auditing the same controls and doing all that for every single client you're auditing, that doesn't seem like that's really true. We all know how companies work. Most of them don't work the same. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree. That
so,
makes sense. That makes sense. It's it. So, like something I want to follow up on based on what you've said is like there is this discussion around like, of course, SOC 2 in a box. Some people they're really, really vocal about that, SOC 2 commoditisation, etc. You just said like startups kind of simple tech stack, often always the same. It's like AWS, Jira, GitHub, Slack, Zoom, can same 10 systems across all of them. I see people saying, and I'm curious what you think about that. I see people saying on the kind of bottom end of the market, like no report is better than a bad report, or like no compliance is better than bad compliance. I have a very specific opinion on that, but I want to kind of get what you think about like having something a bit janky, quick to just sell, probably, right? Versus not having anything.
it's a good question. I guess is no compliance better than bad compliance? It depends, I guess, what the auditor looked at. Like if they were at least, if you're going through an audit, I'll put it this way. If you're going through an audit and at the end of that audit, you're like, did the auditor actually do anything? Like, did they actually look at anything? Like, this seemed like they didn't really audit me. And I was expecting a lot more. If that's your reaction after the audit, no compliance is better than a bad compliance. Because now you're telling the world, look, we have all these great controls in place, and maybe you don't because you're not even confident that the auditor actually looked at anything. Now, if you get a report and you feel like, well, okay, they did look at this. I showed them this. I showed them that. Like, okay, I think they were looking at this, and I did have to fix this a couple times, or we did do this. Like, then I would say you're probably better doing something rather than nothing in that case, right? But I do believe that people getting audited, like, there's this. I think there's a people always say like we need to educate the market. We need to educate. It's because people aren't. I'm like, I don't actually think that's true. I think anybody who hasn't been through an audit before, I mean, we all know like if someone's looking at something I'm doing, they should be looking at it, right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
so if and I have a feeling there's some audit firms out there that are actually not really auditing or looking at anything. And these auditees know this, and they know what they're paying for, but they don't actually care. And they're accepting that. Um, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I mean, I understand the situation.
Yeah.
Some certain startups, like I get it. You're in survive mode, right? We just got to go, go, go. We don't have time to worry about this. But in that situation, I don't think you're better off answering security questionnaires and actually telling your customers what you're actually doing in that case than just having paper a paper tiger in your hand that probably isn't telling the truth at all. Like that's lying to your customers, right? So like, what do you feel like after the audit? Like that'll tell you everything you need to know, in my opinion. Like people know if they were audited or not. I firmly believe that. It's not hard to know. Did they look at our infrastructure or not? Like you built the infrastructure, you know what, if you were auditing it, what would you look at, right? So that's my theory on that.
Okay, that's interesting. I agree with the premises. Like for me, if you're a startup or high growth company that mostly, as we said, like kind of survival, etc. Yeah, I get what you said about like kind of how you felt after the audit. Like, did you feel like they actually did something in terms of like some scrutiny? Or like, did you just, it was chill all along, super easy. You see that in some of the stuff you've shared on LinkedIn, right? It's like, we'll kind of push away the nosy, the nosy auditors and everything. But I'm like, should they care? I'm trying to kind of give more details because I'm like, you're right that most likely even with a bad SOC 2, like especially like the more kind of, you kind of know either an auditor or specific way when you kind of check a couple of pages, you can understand how it would look like internally. Like just know that it's kind of more of those copycat reports, but then you just send them a questionnaire. And I'm like, if it's a requirement to sell, then we'll have people gaming the system to get it for the cheapest amount of money. But at the same time, like I'm like automation platforms, they do basic continuous control monitoring, especially for controls where it's easy to pull in like API data and just test against it. I still see that as better than nothing because I'm like, if there is no incentive to go through any audit at all, even the worst of audits, like those companies, they won't go through it at all, like they did before, right? Before kind of know which vendor kind of started leaving Dropbox, kind of starting her company around that. Like before that, it was potentially a deal breaker for startups if they couldn't, and it was hefty fees to go through the whole process. So I'm like, it sends a bad signal potentially, but I'm like, the market is educated on the value because you sell to enterprise, which means TPRM teams, which means teams that are used to reviewing those every single day. So I'm like, the gaming works for maybe the greater public. And I'm like, gaming someone that reviews SOC 2s for a living is a bit tougher because those people, they literally do that all day.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I, I guess if we're talking like the control monitoring piece, I would say focus on that. Like if I gotta put it this way, like if people are just getting a SOC 2 to like get a check mark, like, and that's how you want to prove security to your vendor, to your customers, because that's what they're asking for. And as a customer, you're looking at this and you know it's just a checkbox. Why are you forcing them to get a SOC 2 anyways in the first place? Like, why aren't you doing other, like, let's just say it's a new tech startup. You really are into that. You know, they're new. So, they're going to probably spend nothing on everything right now. So whatever you're going to get is probably whatever, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
from a SOC 2 report perspective, they're going to do the cheapest. They're going to do the fastest. Like, that already because they're a new, it, that's how capitalism works. Like, that's what we're going to do. So why are we making them do it? Like, why aren't we making them do something else instead for those companies? Like, that's what I always kind of was like, why are we doing, like, why? Like, that's kind of where I go back to. It's like that incentive is created to game the system because they can't really afford to do it the right way, even if they want to do it the right way, because they're new. But is there a better way for TPRM teams to assess risk than forcing them just to pay for a piece of paper, right?
No, I agree.
And if the only reason they're doing that is just from a liability perspective, then in my opinion, you're not asking them for SOC 2 for a security risk perspective. You're asking them so that you have protection legally then and say, hey, I got a SOC 2 report from them. And you don't actually care what's in it. You just care about it so you can show people like, well, they had a SOC 2. We did what we were supposed to do from a due diligence perspective.
CYA.
Why, in my opinion, right? So like TPRM teams also need to think hard about why they're actually requesting these things and be honest about it. If it's just for legal protection, that's different than doing a security risk assessment, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think a lot of that is, as I said, CYA, right? It's just like, just in case someone asks something, hey, we had the report. Look.
And it's not there to know if the auditor is good or bad, right? That's the ecosystem's job, technically.
100%. And what you said was interesting. You said like, they could potentially find another way of kind of guaranteeing that assurance, because if like this whole system is just like for CYA, maybe we should find another way. And it's funny because it comes back to a post you did recently about kind of how some GRC automation companies would prefer those frameworks to not exist, and replace it with something else, which I agree with the theory. And, can't say anything here, but, I think even in practice, I would say that some vendors told me that. I won't name anyone because I know all of them. So, no one can guess who. But I think, what do you think about that? Because technically you said like, SOC 2 to do it well has a certain cost. You can't do it like for super cheap and get something good out of it. And then if you do it on the cheap, then it's mostly relying on the testing that was done by the platform. And then it provides super low assurance levels to the TPRM teams just because it hasn't been done to a certain like level of thoroughness. So it potentially could do something else. And those platforms, think accurately, I agree with you. I think they want some of those frameworks to not apply especially to that bottom end and replace it with something else. And because do you think they are trying to kill it or replace it? What do you think they're trying to do?
I think some of them want to get rid of it and want to eliminate some of them. I mean, I don't have any like, no one's ever told me this no one's ever actually told me this. It's just my understanding of behavior of the market and trying to like, I mean, I've talked to certain people, but not at the platform specifically about this. And then also just understanding behavior and observing things, right? And seeing how it's all working out. But I do think some of them want to completely eliminate it. But I also do see like maybe relying on a trust center for a small startup that really can't get a SOC 2 from a reputable firm. Or maybe I'll put it this way, can't get a SOC 2 from a firm that the TPRM team would trust, right? Because really they're the ones that are, I guess, have to trust the CPA from doing the audit, not what I say. But maybe they can't afford one and they know that. So then, yeah, maybe the continuous control monitoring from a third-party tool, maybe that is good enough to show like, hey, like, yeah, they do have MFA turned on for everything. They do have all this in place. They do all this. Like maybe that is better than actually a SOC 2 for those companies. But then the TPRM teams have to, replace GRC automation tool or replace auditor with GRC automation tool. Well, now I gain trust over the GRC. How do I gain trust over that, right? So I don't think that piece of it necessarily goes away, but I do think it's a more economical and feasible approach for smaller startups, and could provide the assurance that companies need for those smaller companies. As you get bigger, maybe just relying on a trust center is not the best thing to do from an assurance perspective for a TPRM team. You might want an independent third party to look at that monitoring system, look at it, understand how everything's working, and use both, right? But I think if we're just saying I'm gonna have my small vendor and they're gonna give me a SOC 2 audit from Joe's car shop on the street that had a CPA sign off on the report, and I'm just going to accept it. What have we accomplished? We've actually made it worse, in my opinion. Like, we're not helping anything in that case. So if the alternative is for those companies to just have a trust center and have it be relied upon, yeah, I don't actually see anything wrong with that. I mean, I think too many people are getting SOC 2. I mean, it degrades the market, it commoditizes it. Like it's what leads to all these problems, in my opinion, because it's not necessary for all companies, but people make it necessary because they're checking boxes. So
the problem is always TPRM. It's always their fault, right? It's just the root of all evil.
I don't think it's TPRM. Well, I mean,
I'm
they're limited
kidding, just in case.
resources, right? So I get it. It's not easy to be in TPRM of a large company and have thousands of
Yeah.
vendors and trying to manage all that and understand, like, I
You
understand.
need like that common denominator. That's what's tough when you have to assess thousands, even hundreds. I think it's so tough to build because you have a risk-based approach, but then even if you kind of tier all your vendors, like you might still have like in each bucket hundreds, and SOC 2 reports can be very lengthy already. And if you multiply it by every single vendor that you need to read through, it's what's tough is finding that baseline that you can, because you need to standardize your assessment on the TPRM side. So you need kind of a set of documents you ask everyone, so the work is on their side. You don't end up, because reviewing Source Center takes manual effort to then check stuff and like get access the NDA. So the issue is like on the side,
Very
like
manual too.
it is. So yeah, it's a challenging problem, but like that's interesting when you say like not everyone should get SOC 2, because like if what I'm going to say is a bit weird, but if in a sense, like if they couldn't, they wouldn't be able to get it, right? I think what's weird is like if SOC 2, because it's like there's narrative aspects, there's like all the sections comparing to ISO, right? Which like I'm European, so that's where I was trained on and stuff. Like the like some frameworks, if you're not like PCI or others, like if you don't have already something like super strong setup, like you literally just can't pass. You just there's no point. But SOC 2, because there's this aspect where you kind of define your own controls, etc., like it kind of gives the ability for any size and any complexity and to also have that report. And you can find a CPA that would attest, like you can check all the requirements to get your report. And do you think we should gatekeep it to a specific size, specific complexity, specific, or do you think we should have like high quality criteria based on like I don't know, like what would be the approach?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I have that discussion a lot. What would be the approach to kind of fix the the challenge and the problem, I guess, of all this? Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should be gatekeeped. I mean, it's possible to have like a SOC 2 light in the framework, right? So maybe like there's a, SOC 2 light, we'll call it, and it has a basic cyber hygiene controls, right? That are prescriptive. You have MFA turned on, you encrypt data, all the basics, right? You security awareness training, role-based access, whatever you could think of, right? Just ask ChatGPT, what are the basic cybersecurity controls? There you go. That'll be your SOC 2 light. But you know, maybe it's 20 controls. Maybe that's it, right? And it's SOC 2 light. And based on your organization, maybe you qualify to do a SOC 2 light because you're under a certain revenue. The type of data you have is not as very highly sensitive, right? Like maybe there's certain risk factors that are considered. And that could be one possible solution, right? I don't know, but it would have to be TPRM teams would have to understand how to identify a SOC 2 light report versus a non SOC 2 light report, whatever you want, right? So you kind of, and no matter what solution you come up with from that perspective, somebody will get confused by it, right? And rely on a SOC 2 light for like when they're not supposed to, or like someone will, get it wrong and whatever the case may be. Or a TPRM team will say like, well, we didn't want you to do a SOC 2 light. We thought you should do a SOC 2 Pro version, right? There's no like perfect solution, but that could be one possible way to kind of say like, okay, if you only want to pay $5,000 for this, then let's just do a $5,000 audit. Here's 20 basic controls. Let's actually give you something that's complete and accurate. TPRM teams, do you want to rely on that or not? No, we actually want you to do the pro version. Well, that's like, no, that's a lot more, like that's probably more than 5,000, right? But at least we're all on the same page and there's more transparency and from that perspective. Whereas right now, a SOC 2 report from AWS that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, is that the same as a SOC 2 report from a 10-person company that paid $1,000? Like, are we placing the same? Like, technically, they're both a SOC 2 report, right? And there's no difference. They're both a SOC 2 report, right? they probably shouldn't be the same report. So that's, I don't know. I don't know if it's feasible what I said, but that's a possible solution, I guess.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Because I'm like, so of course, like, for example, Justin Pagano, so from the group, GRC Engineering Group, he recently did a blog post around SOC 2, kind of running something called Alcove, which is like a new way he was thinking about like doing kind of like assurance. We're thinking about it on the TPRM side with Charles and others. I think what I think you're completely right. Like AWS SOC 2, probably hundreds of pages versus like, you know, very small one from like a small audit firm and stuff. Like, but I'm like, if you understand the inherent trust you can give to these different, like, then it's more like the culture of the assessor. Like, do you understand that this is like coming from enterprise, super complex company? This one is coming from small one. You don't even, because what Justin likes to say is like the current SOC 2 is already SOC 2 light. That's what he thinks. Because there's that leeway, etc. And I'm like, for me, what is, because a lot of that for me is the pricing discussion, meaning like the cheaper, potentially less assurance provided, etc. Like the time you spend will be human hours, right? So it will be human hours spent, which will be priced at a certain amount, and then the package will be what me as an ODT I will pay for the audit. And I'm like, how much assurance do I value for each additional human hour you spent on my systems, especially for controls that have machine readable outputs? That's where I'm like, do I price in the auditor judgment? Do I price in the number of decades the auditor has been in the industry and the thousands of audits he conducted? But how do I price that pre kind of cloud and all these concepts versus after? You know, it's like almost we need to price the auditor's opinion and auditor's expertise in the context of like, what is a 5K audit versus a 50K versus a 150K audit? And is it just because my company is complex? Or is it because your expertise as an auditor is more valuable inherently for me?
So you're asking, how do you price the audit firm? Like, how do you value the
Yeah, because you see cheap audits, and I'm like, if there's like time efficiencies, like and those time savings are pushed back to customers, so they pay less. I'm like, in of itself, this is not a reduction in quality. I want to understand like kind of how you price in quality in the context of like a SOC 2 audit.
I think right now, if you want that, how it's being done, you're just paying for brand mostly. So like, I think like, you know, the bigger firms, I don't know if the bigger firms do higher quality audits than, let's say, my firm. If you ask me, I would tell you we do the same quality audit, right? But I also can't charge as much as them because they have a huge brand recognition, and there's a persona that comes along with that, right? That you're kind of for, right? So I don't really know how to answer the question, because I don't think people are actually paying for quality. I mean, I don't think they believe they're paying for quality per se. I mean, they might believe it, but I'm not sure that's what it is, what they're actually paying for, right? I mean,
Okay,
as people don't know how to measure quality actually, right? It's just based on reputation, theoretically, right? So
100%.
if I can't measure it, how do I know how much to pay for it? Like but, you know, that's kind of my answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it, because like when we kind of dig deep on it, it feels like marketing might be almost, because I'm like, you know, of course we won't name any names, but there's a couple of kind of more cyber focused kind of CPA firms. Like a lot of them, they've garnered like a reputation of quality. And of course there's the traditional, like the top 20 CPA and like Big Four, all companies that people know about. And I'm like, so of course I won't name any names, but I've been audited by all tiers. And it's not, the best is not where people would think it's the best versus like the kind of reputation they have. And what I find interesting is it feels almost like the way you portray yourself in the market would make your reports more or less valuable. So certain firms, they have this reputation for quality, but when we speak on Slack groups, private Slack groups, or like across auditees, we can say, oh no, actually they're trash. Or actually there's this massive thing they forget about every single year, which shouldn't happen, but it still happened, and it's stuff we discussed like on the auditee side. But those firms, in the broader understanding, especially for TPRM firms, or they see that kind of logo, they're like, okay, this is serious, because that company made their branding that way.
Yeah. And well, yes, and I guess you're right. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not. I don't disagree with that. I I do struggle with this a lot. Like, I mean, like, I know that we don't perform perfect audits. I don't perform perfect audit. Like, but no one's ever like, no one's going to tell their auditor, right, that hey, you missed this, right? Like, you should be auditing this next year.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
tough.
maybe they might if they went on to a different company and they were like, we're friends. You should have been looking at this the whole time, right? But as long as
Yeah,
they're auditing your company, like, you don't necessarily have an incentive to tell them to look for something they should know what to look for, right? So a lot of auditors don't get that feedback loop. I mean, I'm trying to think of in my entire career, maybe a few times, right? Because we were doing, but it's very rare, right? You got to have a really good relationship with them and they have to really trust you and you have to know them, right? You almost have to be friends with them before you do their audit, like know them
yeah.
past life for them to do that, right? Because no one's has an incentive to do that. So how do you get that feedback loop as an auditor, right? So people are going to talk about it in private conversations. No one wants to tell their auditor they're doing a bad job. Um, Maybe they'll leave and find a new audit firm. You're not really going to know if that's the reason why, though. Um,
Yeah, it could be any reason. 100%.
right? So, like, it's they're going to tell you it's price. But that's part of the reason why I have kind of taken the route I've taken too with my brand building. Hopefully, just like with the brand I built on LinkedIn, is like there's an inherent trust that like these guys know what they're doing, and when we see a report and find assurance, like we trust that because we know who's behind the report, right? Um, Now the bigger firms have thousands and they're billion-dollar companies. They have thousands, tens of thousands of employees. You're never going to be able to know who's behind those reports actually, right? So you can do that for the smaller firms because you know us, right? And you're working with the founders, right? But yeah, I mean it's hard to know that, but that's part of the reason why I do what I do on LinkedIn and build a brand because I try to be like when you look at that report, like you're gonna see my picture in it. Like you're gonna like when you see the fine insurance, you're gonna be like, oh, Troy, his face is
Of
behind
course.
that report. Like I know he looked into this. We trust that. Like, and I'm in a unique situation because of the brand I built, right? But like that's how I view it. Like that's what I want TPRM teams to do, right? Is like know who I am, and when they see that report, they're like, oh, good. He really
This
looked.
is the real deal.
That's how I've approached it, right? And hopefully my customers and my clients understand that, and we can charge a little bit more in a premium for that because they know they're getting a trusted partner.
No, 100%. And similar, you probably know like David Forman, right? From
Yep.
Mastermind. I think there's this similar approach to brand building, which I actually really like. I think it's smart, and it's like in a more, I don't want to say like materialistic way. It's just like also like someone you trust their insights, their understanding of the framework, the understanding of like the broader market and like the control domains, etc. Like you trust that if they're your auditor, like you'll have something valuable. It's the way companies traditionally did with like actual paid marketing or like typical brand on the corporate side. You're just doing it as an individual as you've built your brand like throughout the years. But I think it's just as valuable, even more just because there's like one individual that I've been trusting for years versus the brand. It's a little bit more kind of faceless in a sense. You could have any auditor, the intern, or like the most senior. Whereas most likely for a smaller firm, you'll get the actual person or close to it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Or there's some really small firms out there where the platforms just do all the talking for you, and you don't even know who audit you, and you just get a report on Slack, and it's in your Slack channel. Here's your SOC 2 report, and you don't even know
nice.
what you do. That's also one way to be faceless, I guess, as an audit firm. But
That's true. That's very true.
but like I think in the age of trust and in the age of AI, like I believe that it'll be a competitive advantage to know who's behind the report. I mean, obviously there's gonna be new companies that are growing up. We just talked about in the beginning, right? This AI enabled world. They're
Yeah.
not going to want to work with me. Like, that's fine. They have a different perception on it. There's enough out there for all of us. But the people that, want to trust who's doing something and want to know who it is, those are the clients that are going to want to work with the firms like mine, I believe. They're not going to want that, that AI does everything for you and you don't even know if there's a human in the loop, right? Like,
Yeah.
now that could be a generational thing and things like that. And maybe I'll have to adjust that. But it's how I grew up. It's my origins, right? So I didn't grow up in that world.
Yeah.
So, when I buy services, that's how I buy services, right? I mean, professional services at least, right? I'm talking
Hmm.
specifically like there should be a professional behind
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Versus an agent.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying you can't
Yeah.
rely on agents to help you do your work. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, we use AI to help us evaluate stuff and do things, but I'm still looking at the evidence and saying, like, did that AI like do that correctly?
Yeah.
I did, but I also know what I'm looking for because I've been doing it for 15 years, right? So
Yeah, exactly. It's that whole AI evaluation part. Is
yeah,
like, can you
it's a whole
trust the
nother
output? And
podcast.
yeah, probably.
But anyway,
One last
back
question.
to brand recognition, right? And building that brand and knowing who's behind the report. So that's what we're going for.
No, 100%, 100%. In a question I had is like around the. So I want to kind of go back to the platforms. Just spoke about it a little bit. Like the newer platforms. Okay, let's say even within the automation industry, let's say there's two waves. Okay, there's a wave that has a lot less claims around speed, around I won't say 15 hours, but some of these numbers have been said by companies. Um, there's a lot less claims about speed because maybe they're maturing also their customer base. So the customer base might already been through the first audit cycle. So speed doesn't make sense like it makes sense up until you get the first one, but then you can't really speed up the audit cycle. Is if it's a yearly audit cycle, you can't just get faster to the next year. So those have matured in the marketing and kind of the feature set as well to kind of cater to more assurance driven organizations. And there's a new wave at the bottom end, especially a lot of AI powered companies. And these ones are a lot more strong in the marketing. And also there's like the older stage automation that leverage some professional services or like packages that have implementation plus audits, etc. And you've been speaking a lot about that recently. Um, I see that almost all of these are speaking to the bottom end. And we spoke about bottom end, kind of the value they get, like etc. And it's for me, it's interesting because your brand for me is more like enterprise in terms of who you audit, who you would work with. And I think even a lot of the people that follow you, I think they work at more established companies and they've been in the industry for decades. But their marketing is not for us in a sense. It's almost like, a lot of these vendors, they have different pages for different tiers. Like, how do you think about, like, do you think they can be wrong if they speak differently to their target audience? Or do you think it's still wrong even though they kind of try to speak to the way that they should be spoken to?
I think if they're speaking for auditors and guaranteeing audit success at any tier, it's wrong. And any auditors that are agreeing to that and partnering with them and allowing that are wrong also. So I've been pretty clear about that, I think.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
The reason actually I'm so adamant about it is because I believe it's um it's a black eye to the industry, right? So like people aren't viewing it like you just did, right? Like I don't think they're looking at it like, okay, they're only marketing it this way to this company and this. They're looking at it like,
No, I know.
oh, this is how SOC 2 is. Like this is what it's become. Like great. Why do I care about it's all broken, right? The whole system's broken. And so I think that's the reason why I'm trying to like make people aware and like show like, hey, this isn't right. Like, and I can't control what the software companies and how they market, right? And I can't control CPA firms either, right? But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
CPA firms are the gatekeepers of SOC 2, right? They're the ones that are issuing the reports. That's how it's supposed to be, right? So they can make decisions on how they want to obtain new clients and new revenue, and they're making decisions on how they want to approach this, right? Um, and so I'm kind of focusing on that piece of it. Like, hey, if you're a CPA firm and you're working with these guys, and here's what they're doing, here's why it's wrong for the CPA firm. I don't really necessarily care what anybody's charging for these things. I actually don't care about any of that because I don't think that actually matters in any of this. I think it all comes back to integrity, and I think it's ruining the integrity of the audit ecosystem, the profession, the CPA name, SOC 2, ISO 20s, all of them. Like, it's all being driven to like, why am I relying on this if anybody could just do this in 2 hours and get this report and done? Yes, I agree. It is definitely for the smaller companies. It is not for the complex ones, but it does bring down the whole industry and the whole integrity of the SOC 2 report when someone's looking at it. So the same way I just said, when someone looks at my report, I want them to see my face, like in it, like in their mind, like that's behind it. When they're seeing all this information out there, when they're seeing this marketing, when they look at a SOC 2 report, it becomes instantly whatever, check the box. This is meaningless anyways. Like, who knows how they actually did it? None of this actually, these words might not even mean anything. I don't care if it's EY, Fine Assurance, uh, Joe's CPA from down the street that did it. You can't even trust it anymore just because of what the market's become. So I think that's how I think what's happening. And that's why I fight against it. And I'm like, I just think it's bringing down everything, and it's just creating a black eye because of it. So that's why I'm focused on it. It just so happens that the people doing the marketing are are companies promoting AI and charging 1,000, having audit firms that charge next to nothing for an audit. But again, that's not really, the pricing has nothing to do with it, because like you said, our marketing and our trust is really going after bigger companies and enterprise customers that aren't using those tools anyways. So I'm not losing business because of it. I don't
No,
even
100%.
So I think it's just me fighting for the integrity of the profession. And yeah, if the integrity of my SOC 2 audit goes down, guess what? I probably can't charge it does hurt me indirectly, right? Too.
No, yeah.
So selfishly, that is why I'm doing it also, to be honest, but it also is, it's going to bring us all down if we don't stop it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Because I think some of the more established players, of course, like there has been some friction. Like I'm only speaking about GRC automation. There has been some friction in the past, but I think like the newer wave of GRC automation vendors, I don't think they care even about I think
No.
the older generation, I think they did their best to kind of walk on eggs, to kind of have good, okay-ish or good auditor experience in their tools, try to build some stuff that relate to some of the older generation tools that were in the early 2010s. But I think the new wave, I think it's almost the contra. I think they're trying to literally attack auditors. I think it's more around like this whole thing is pointless. So the common denominator will only be price and speed, but they don't really care about any other outcomes outside of that.
Yeah, no. I definitely agree with that. I don't think they care. They definitely don't care about the integrity of the profession. And that is what drove my post about saying they want to eliminate, like, they don't care because they really just want their tool to be the assurance tool that everyone uses for TPRM teams. Whatever, this compliance is here. We got to do it now. But our ultimate goal is to become the assurance platform that people use. We don't need compliance. We don't need auditors. We'll find auditors that'll just go along with us, and we'll give them, a ton of money just to do these and sign off. And we don't care if they lose their license either and do this the wrong way, because whatever, not my problem. So that's how I think it's happening. And that's what I do feel that culture is definitely out there. If that culture succeeds, I guess that's what the market wanted. So be it. I guess I'll go find something else to do. But if the ship is going down, I keep telling people, if the ship is going down, I'm going to go down fighting. So
no, 100%, 100%. Yeah. Thanks a lot. That has been a great conversation. Lots of good insights. And I think it was kind of cool to compare notes and discuss that. You've been a trusted voice in the industry, and it's been a lot of fun to chat with you about all this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on the show. If I'm the first non-engineer, I love it. I'll take that to heart. And congratulations on building your brand on LinkedIn with GRC Engineering. I think you've done a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. Appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course. Take care.
See ya.
Bye.